while you're talking, and then I'll come back on.
Sounds good. Hi, everyone. Welcome. And before we begin, I would like to start with my land acknowledgement. I respectfully acknowledge that I live and work on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded land of the Coast Salish peoples, including the Stalo Nation. Indigenous peoples have cared for this land for thousands of years, and I recognize their deep connection to it. I am committed to learning, listening, and supporting reconciliation, respect, and Indigenous rights. My name is Prim Mickey, and I'm the director of the BC Interior Resource Center with the Huntington Society of Canada. I support individuals and families across the interior of BC who are impacted by Huntington's disease. I've been with HSG since 2023, and in my role, I work closely with families navigating the complex medical, financial, and emotional realities that come with HD. A big part of what we do is to help connect people to resources, supports, and practical tools that can make daily life a little more manageable. That's why today's topic, the disability tax credit, is so important. For many individuals and families living with HD, financial strain is a very real concern. Accessing benefits like the disability tax credit can open the door to additional financial supports, retroactive payments, and other programs that can make a meaningful difference. At HSG, we believe families shouldn't have to navigate these systems alone. Providing clear information and trusted guidance is part of how we support our community, and today's session is one more step in that. Thank you for being here, and I'm looking forward to this important conversation. Before we move forward, I would like to take a moment to highlight who we are as an organization. Our mission at the Huntington Society of Canada is to improve the quality of life for those affected by Huntington's disease. Everything we do, from family support to education to advocacy to sessions like this one, is grounded in that mission. HSC is a not-for-profit charitable organization that supports the many and evolving needs of families across Canada. We are committed to ensuring that individuals and families affected by HD have access to reliable information, meaningful support, and practical resources that can make a real difference in their day-to-day lives. This slide gives a snapshot of our family services program structure at the Huntington Society of Canada. Our team includes a national director, 2 team leads, 1 national family services educator, 1 national child and youth practitioner, and 16 resource center directors located across Canada. Together, this national team works collaboratively to support individuals, children, youth, caregivers, and families affected by HD. While we each serve different regions, we are connected across the country, sharing knowledge, resources, and expertise to ensure families receive consistent, informed, and compassionate support no matter where they live. As part of the Family Services Program at the Huntington Society of Canada, we provide a range of supports to individuals and families affected by HD. Some of the key things we do include providing direct support to individuals and families, running local, regional, and national support groups, offering information, education, and referrals, providing short-term counseling, engaging in individual advocacy, supporting local HSC chapters, and participating in multidisciplinary HD clinics. Our goal is to meet families where they are, whether that's navigating a new diagnosis, planning for the future, accessing financial supports, or simply needing someone to talk to who understands the HD journey. All of these services are designed to help improve the quality of life and ensure families feel supported and informed. As Resource Center Director with HSC, we are an integral part of your multidisciplinary medical team. We can be involved in care, discussions, and planning, and if we're not already connected to your clinic team, we can be brought in to support you. Please let us know when you or your family member would benefit from having an advocate or HD resource involved. We are here to help ensure your voice is heard and that you feel informed and supported. Our role extends beyond HD or movement disorder clinics. We also support families in many aspects of living with HD, including education, system navigation, financial resources, family dynamics, and future planning. We are part of your broader support system, not just your clinical appointments. On this slide, I just want to briefly highlight the Family Services team and our connection to disability programs such as Plan Institute. We are an integral part of many community care teams supporting individuals and families affected by HD. That can include collaboration with disability programs, financial planning supports, healthcare providers, and other community services. It's important to know that we can be involved whenever needed. We simply just need to be invited to the conversation. Our role is to work alongside you and your broader care team to help ensure coordinated, informed, and person-centered support. To connect with an RCD, you can scan this QR code on the screen using your phone camera. I'll give it 1 to 2 minutes. I'll leave this up. You're also welcome to copy down the link that's provided on the slide. And you can also find this information directly on our website, the Huntington Society of Canada's website, by navigating to the appropriate section after this session. And for convenience, we will also place the direct link in the chat box at the end of the presentation so that you can easily access it. We'll just give another minute or so. So if anyone does want to scan the QR code, you're more than welcome to. If not, like I mentioned, we will have it up at the end on the chat box. Right. I'm going to continue on, but like I mentioned, we will have it in the chat box, or you can find this on our Huntington Society of Canada website. Lastly, it's my pleasure to introduce our presenter, Liz Cairns. Liz is a neurodivergent disabled person and a family caregiver to their wife and grandmother. They bring both lived experience and professional expertise to their work. They are the program manager at the Plan Institute, where they support the organization's free national disability planning helpline service, develop and facilitate events and resources, and connect with organizations across Canada. We're very grateful to have Liz with us today to share their knowledge and guide us through this important topic. Please join me in welcoming Liz. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that intro, Quinn. I am going to go ahead and share my screen now. So uh, please let me know if any issues come up with that, but I think we are doing well. So, yes, I am really excited to be here today to speak with you all about the disability tax credit, also known as the DTC, and the T2201 form available through the Canada Revenue Agency. I'd like to give my own territorial acknowledgement as well. So, Plan Institute operates on the traditional, ancestral, and often unceded territories of the Kikite, Coast Salish, Stalo, Tsleil-Waututh, Squamish, Musqueam, Holcomb Treaty Group, and Cayuse, Umatilla, and Walla Walla nations. Our work, however, extends across so-called Canada and occupied lands of many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. As a settler organization, we extend our respect and gratitude to these peoples who have stewarded these lands since time immemorial. We know that in a world where Indigenous people thrive, disabled people flourish also. Decolonization and reconciliation are integral to our work helping disabled people live their good lives, and we remain committed to ongoing repair of colonial harm as an organization. I also like to start all of my webinars with a brief disclaimer. So this really is just an opportunity to say that the information that I'm sharing is really intended as a general source of information. This should not be considered specific medical, tax, legal, or financial advice. I've made every effort to make sure that the information that I'm providing you is correct and accurate. However, we do know that laws, policies, and regulations can change. So please do consult with the relevant professional before taking action. That being said, I have been working with Plan Institute since 2017, and most of my time within the organization has been helping to has been working to support people to understand and access different disability benefits and programs like the disability tax credit. So please ask any questions that you have. You can type them into the Q&A box, which is usually available at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to type them in whenever they come up for you, and we will have time for our question and answer session at the end, and I'll just answer them in the order that they were asked. If you're having any technical issues or anything like that, please feel free to send the hosts a chat message and we'll be able to support you that way as well. So we're almost through with the intros for the webinar today. I will then be talking mostly about the disability tax credit. So first looking at the benefits of the DTC as well as eligibility criteria. I'll be sharing information about the application, how to apply, some tips on that process, as well as going through some example situations. And then before we end with our question and answer session, I'll be talking about what happens after you apply and making sure that you have the opportunity to access benefits that are connected to the DTC. So not much more to introduce about myself. Quinn did a great job of expressing who I am, and I'm really excited to share my knowledge with all of you. So for those that may not be familiar with Plan Institute, Plan Institute is a national nonprofit organization with our mission being to empower people with disabilities to lead a good life, whatever that looks like to them. We do that by offering support in three main areas. So the first is with our one-on-one disability planning. So we can provide free support to people all across Canada by phone, email, video calls, on rare occasions in person when it works out that the person offering support is located near the person who needs support. Of course, a little bit harder to do when you're a cross-Canada organization, but we do our best to make sure that our support is accessible. And we do offer free interpretation supports as well for those that may need that. We also offer several education and learning opportunities, just like the webinar that I'm facilitating today. And then on a larger, more systemic level, we also work to provide leadership and advocate on a systems level to try and make meaningful change and improvements to the benefits that currently exist or are in the process of being developed. So I'm going to be talking to you about the disability tax credit today, and Plan Institute is one of several organizations across Canada that can provide free support in accessing this credit. For example, Plan Institute is in a partnership with Disability Alliance Canada, as well as their BC counterpart, Disability Alliance BC. And we do have an Indigenous partner, Indigenous Disability Canada, also known as the BC Aboriginal Network on Disability Society. So lots of acronyms that we have within the partnership. But really, the important thing is that our goal as organizations are to reduce barriers to and increase the uptake of important benefits like the disability tax credit. All right, now to talk about what you have all tuned in for, which is what is the disability tax credit? So first, I just want to confirm that anybody who is working or making an income in Canada is required to file taxes based on the income that they have earned that year. In Canada, taxes are collected by the Canada Revenue Agency, also known as the CRA. Even if you don't earn any money, however, filing your taxes can be really important. This is because filing your taxes is connected to a lot of other benefits, and you might be able to receive money from the CRA if you are a parent, a student, you pay taxes on goods and services, you have a lot of medical expenses, and if you have a disability. So the disability tax credit, or DTC, was specifically designed as something that we call a non-refundable tax credit. So this means that if you don't pay any money in taxes, you're not likely to get any money back as a refund when you do file your taxes. So that particular aspect of the DTC isn't as useful for all people. The DTC was designed as a way to recognize that it often costs a lot more money to live with a disability than it is to live without a disability. And so this credit was one way of trying to offset those costs. It's also important to know that if you are the disabled person and you are approved for this credit, you can also transfer that credit to other supporting family members. And if they have a taxable income, they could potentially receive a refund on their taxes, or have to pay less money in tax. The reason that we have worked so hard to share information and help people access the disability tax credit is because it is incredibly underused. So in 2018, there was a research study that showed that about 40% of Canadian adults with qualifying conditions currently benefit from the disability tax credit due to significant barriers to access. When we look at the amount of people who are children, or people who maybe don't have as clear-cut disabilities, that percentage would probably actually be even lower than 40%. Now, we know that there can be a lot of challenges in accessing the DTC. This could be lack of a medical professional, lack of understanding about, what types of conditions qualify for the DTC, potentially medical practitioner misinformation. Sometimes there are costs associated with applying. So we do our best to try and remove those barriers as much as we have the ability to. So again, when we're looking at the tax benefits of the DTC, it can help reduce taxes owing. Also, if you're approved for the DTC and it is approved back to when your disability first began, you could get a refund for some or all of the taxes you paid up to 10 years in the past. Similarly, you can have the person you're transferring that to get their DTC or the DTC credit amount put on their own taxes and get a refund. And again, because of that transfer, that can be really helpful. Now, on the screen here, I show what the disability tax credit amount is. For adults, it's just over $10,000. And for children, there's an additional up to just under $6,000. But when we look at how much the DTC is really worth, it gets a little bit complicated. I will say that I'm not going to talk too much about this, but in case you have questions, feel free to ask and I'll do my best to answer. But the important thing to note is that, it's not likely that somebody receive that full about $10,000 or that full about 6,000 or $16,000 back by filing their taxes. Any person who is um, requesting the use of a non-refundable tax credit, they can only claim up to 15% of that amount. So with just the amount for adults, that would be about $1,500. And so in addition to that, there are different calculations depending on what province and territory that you're in. So the amount of money that you could actually see back as a refund is going to depend on your personal situation. Now, I'm not going to talk too much about this either about how supporting family members can benefit, but if you do want to transfer your DTC to a supporting family member, this would be a person who provides you with regular food, shelter, and or clothing, and is related to you either by birth, marriage, or adoption. You could potentially have them put their information right in the application. There are two parts to the application. Part A is for the applicant directly, and part two of or question two of part A is going to ask about the caregiver or supporting family members information. It's important to know that the disability tax credit amount is always going to be applied to your taxes first, and then remaining amounts can be transferred to one or more other family members. So right now, parents, guardians, and legal representatives can choose to get their taxes reassessed automatically on the application form, but other family members are going to need to submit a readjustment request by letter or by using the T1 adjustment form. All right, so on the screen here, I have a little snapshot of what the disability tax credit application looks like in that section. So here we can see under question two, it asks to tell us about the person intending to claim the disability amount. If different from above, which is where you as the applicant would put your information. So again, this could be any family member who provides regular food, shelter, and or clothing, which the CRA considers to be the basic necessities of life. And important to know that the CRA doesn't care about support that's provided in other areas, for example, with emotional support or transportation support or things like that. But those things can be included in other aspects of the form. So I won't talk too much about the other benefits that are tied to the disability tax credit, just so that we can focus on the disability tax credit itself, since I know it's a lot of information and can be a bit heavy to navigate. So uh, just really wanted to highlight how beneficial the DTC can be, even for people who are not able to work, don't have any income that they're getting. And that's because the DTC over time has really become the federal way of recognizing disability. So it has become tied to a lot of other benefits. So, for example, for workers that are lower income, you can get a refundable amount of over $800 a year through the Canada Workers Benefit Disability Supplement. If you are a caregiver, let's say of a minor child, then you could get money through the child disability benefit per month. For caregivers who are people supporting adults who are approved for the disability tax credit, there's another non-refundable caregiver credit that can be used. With the DTC, you can also claim more money in medical expenses. There are some education-related benefits, like, for example, being able to be considered a full-time student, even if you're taking part-time hours. For homeowners, there are other tax credits, as well as if you have a trust account, which is a very specific type of financial account. I will not go into detail about that, but some benefits for that. And then, most importantly, for some ongoing financial support, both in terms of the registered disability savings plan, which can help provide long term savings for someone, and the relatively new Canada Disability Benefit, which does provide up to $200 per month to people who are between the ages of 18 and 64, approved for the disability tax credit, and are considered low to moderate income. All right, so now we understand a little bit more about why the DTC is so important. Let's talk about eligibility. This tends to be one of the biggest sort of question mark areas that we have for the disability tax credit, both from people who think they might qualify and on the medical professional side. So hopefully this will help to demystify that. So, unlike other benefits, the DTC has no age restrictions. So, a parent could apply for their child pretty much at birth if it was very obvious that they had a disability that will restrict them in life. But you can also apply for the DTC older in life, in your 80s, 90s, or even if you were 100 years old, you could apply. The DTC also does not care about whether you can work or go to school, and it doesn't depend on how much money you earn in the form of income or what your assets and total savings are. Really, to qualify for the DTC, applicants must have a social insurance number or SIN. They must also have what we call a severe and prolonged impairment. So, this impairment can be mental or physical or a combination. And I'll break that down as I go. So, probably the easiest one to understand is that prolonged criteria. So, prolonged means that the impairment has lasted or will last at least 1 year. So, that's typically the amount of time where symptoms need to have been present or are expected to last. Now, when we look at severe, that's where it gets a little bit confusing. So, there are three main ways that somebody can be considered to have a severe impairment. So within the disability tax credit application and part B of the form, which is the, 14 of the 16 pages of the application, that's going to be for the medical professional to fill out. And they won't fill out 100% of the form. They'll only fill out the relevant sections about, basic activities of daily living that the disability tax credit form looks at. So within the basic activities of daily living, we have 8 different categories. So, vision, speaking, feeding, which does include eating and making food, hearing, eliminating, which is your bladder and bowel functions, dressing, mental functions necessary for everyday life, and walking. So, to be considered to have a severe impairment, you can have one of three things. The first is that you have a marked restriction. So that means that you are very restricted in one of those basic activities of daily living. This means that you either can't do that activity, you need a lot of help to do that activity, or it takes you a lot longer to do that activity than most people. Typically, we would look to see how do you compare to somebody who's your same age, but who doesn't have the restrictions that you experience. Does it take you two, three, 4 times longer than that person to do that activity? That will help understand whether it counts as a marked restriction in that one activity. For people who are restricted a little bit less, but in two or more of those activities, then you can qualify as having a severe impairment because the cumulative or the combined effect is equal to a marked restriction. And then also, if you're somebody who needs life-sustaining therapy that keeps you alive and takes up a lot of time, you can access the DTC with that as well. So now I'm going to get into how to apply for the disability tax credit. So this is the logistical information, and then I'm going to give some examples about those different activities of daily living and how you might qualify, because I'm sure many of you have questions about whether you might qualify for this. So there are two ways that you can apply for the disability tax credit, again, also known as Form T2201. So the paper form is something that you typically would start yourself. So you would fill out the first section, that part A of the form, and you can fill that out with or without help. Once that has been filled out, you then take that form to a medical practitioner who's going to finish part B of the form. If you want, depending on where you live, will depend on what organization can offer free support. For example, Plan Institute offers support to people across Canada in creating basically a sample application. So we would fill out all of Part B in a way that the medical professional would. If they agree with that information, the medical professional can just sign right off and confirm that the application can be sent in. But that's not necessary. The medical practitioner can fill it out all on their own as well. And then once both parts have been completed, you send that in to the CRA by mail, which would be to your nearest tax center, or you can submit it online through your CRA My Account. This is just a little screenshot of what part A of that application looks like. So these are the other two sections that I didn't show when I was talking about supporting family members. So with the individual section, it's going to ask about your name, social insurance number, mailing address, and your date of birth. And then on the second page of that application, it's going to ask about whether you want the CRA to automatically reassess your income taxes for up to 10 years in the past. Often we would suggest that people say yes to this question. However, we are hearing that right now it's taking the Canada Revenue Agency up to 1 year once somebody has been approved for the DTC to actually go through and make that reassessment or complete that reassessment request. So my suggestion currently is that if you have an accountant or a free tax clinic, for example, or maybe a family member or friend who helps you with your taxes, and they understand how to do like an adjustment request for your taxes, then you could say no. CRA do not do that automatically. And then that way, once you get your approval, you can submit that. Oftentimes, you can actually submit the request for readjustment directly online. And I think it's maybe 6 or 7 years in the past that you can only do the paper copy, but it may help, especially if you're expecting a bit of a refund amount. And then lastly, on this section that you would complete, you have to put your signature, your phone number, and the date that you've signed it. But otherwise, there's not much information that you as the applicant would have to complete. Now, let's say you wanted to complete the form 100% online. So you could fill out the first section online through your CRA My account, or you can actually call the CRA, and then either of those options is going to give you a reference number. Once you have that reference number, You can give that to your medical practitioner, who then they can go and they can fill out their section of the application online using your reference number, and then they just submit it directly to the CRA using their own portal. And the alternative, though, is that because when the medical professional submits the application directly, you don't get the opportunity to actually look at that application. And so, if you wanted the chance to review what information is being sent in before that happens, the medical practitioner, even completing their portion online, they can actually just print a copy of their answers for you with all their certification. So you have the chance to review, and then you could send it in directly, again, by mail or by uploading it to your CRA account. This is just a little screenshot here of what the online application looks like. So it's fairly straightforward. I completed my disability tax credit application online, and the whole process took like 2 minutes because all of my information was just tied to my account. So I basically just reviewed, made sure it was all accurate, and went from there. Now, at the time, I did not choose any other person to claim that disability tax credit amount on my behalf. So, right now, I'm in the process of creating a letter to request that my parents-in-law can claim the credit on their taxes as well because of the support that they provide me. And so, no real issue doing it either of those two ways. It's just this obviously takes a little bit longer to do it after because it wasn't included in the original application. And then I've also put a little picture here of what the application summary comes out as, which includes your reference number, typically about 8 characters, usually a mix of letters and numbers. And then it's just going to say who the person with the disability is, what their name is, and date of birth. But otherwise, you're not going to get much information than that. And so that's the reference number that you give to your medical practitioner. Now, when we look at who can help you complete the DTC application form, there is a variety of options depending on what basic activity of daily living you qualify under. So currently, it is only medical doctors, which includes psychiatrists and surgeons, as well as nurse practitioners who can complete all sections of the form. If there are Yeah. So, if you qualify or have restrictions in more than one area, often a medical doctor or nurse practitioner would be the best option to complete that. But you can have more than one practitioner complete the form. So, for example, depending on what a medical practitioner's specialty is going to depend on what section they can fill out. So, for example, an occupational therapist is allowed to fill out the walking, feeding, and dressing activity sections of the form, as well as the cumulative effects of those restrictions. A speech language pathologist can fill out the speaking section, physiotherapist can fill out the walking section, and a psychologist can fill out the mental functions necessary for everyday life section. So you do have some options depending on what your situation is, and some of these may be a little bit easier than others. There's no preferred medical professional. Really, we just look to see who knows you the best and is going to provide the most accurate and thorough application to hopefully give you the best chance of getting approved. Again, because this is so important, eligibility is not based on diagnosis. Somebody could have no diagnosis and still get approved as long as they can show that their restrictions are severe in the various ways. It's also really important to provide specific examples about those restrictions. So that's where, for example, Plan Institute or one of our partner organizations could help you out with, and just providing that sample language that you can use. Oftentimes, medical professionals don't know all of the ways in which we're impacted day to day, other than the direct symptoms we experience. And so, having this prepared in advance can help make that appointment a bit faster and maybe might help reduce some barriers in getting your medical practitioner to fill that out for you. It's also important to know that it is the CRA that determines eligibility, so it doesn't hurt to apply. Sometimes medical practitioners will say, "Oh, I don't think you qualify. I don't want to help you out with this form." But at that point, it can be good to remind them, "Well, could you please just try based on what you know of me?" It's going to be the CRA who decides either way. So as long as we're being honest and complete, then it will be up to them to decide whether I qualify or not. Okay, so now I have three example scenarios that talk about each of the different ways that somebody could be considered to have a severe restriction. Once I finish each of the examples, I will then talk about the other considerations for the relevant sections. So the first example scenario we have here is for somebody who has a marked restriction in the feeding category. So this is Isha's situation. So, um, Isha experiences chorea, involuntary, irregular, and unpredictable movements, and has severe difficulty performing tasks related to the feeding category, such as chopping vegetables, reaching ingredients, lifting heavy items independently, and holding utensils. Isha requires frequent rest while cooking and often relies on ready-made meals and assistance from her caregiver. These restrictions occur substantially all of the time. Besides these symptoms, she needs to use adaptive kitchen tools, such as self-stabilizing utensils. Even with these assistive devices, caregiver support, and medication to help manage her symptoms, she takes at least 3 times as long to make and eat food as somebody her age without these restrictions. So here we can see that this would be an example that somebody's medical practitioner could write in the form. And I'm highlighting this here because I want to show the level of detail that the CRA is looking for, and also using language that maybe isn't common for us to use. I think it's a bit clunky. I wouldn't necessarily describe my situation like this, but this is using the words that the CRA is looking for. So because the CRA are not generally trained medical practitioners, they're, on the medical review team, but they may have never provided actual medical treatment to somebody. So it just helps to be as clear and explicit as possible. So looking at timing, how explicitly how long does it take? Substantially all of the time. It takes 3 times as long as somebody your same age. Even with assistive devices and support, these restrictions still exist. All of these things are important to include. So, within that feeding category more broadly, again, this includes not only eating, but also preparing food. This section is going to ask questions like, do you take medication? Do you use any devices? Things like adaptive dinnerware, assistive utensils, a chair or stool to sit on while in the kitchen, feeding tubes. Do you require assistance from others? Do you experience things like pain, fatigue, tremors, impaired coordination, impaired dexterity, limited range of motion, muscle weakness, or difficulty swallowing, all of which can lead to restrictions in your ability to feed. It'll also ask you things like how severe are your symptoms? How often do those symptoms occur? And of course, again, be specific and provide examples. So it's also important to know that if you or potentially somebody that you know or are supporting uses a feeding tube, that is an automatic qualifier as a marked restriction in the feeding category. So while these examples can still be helpful to include, just including the information that you or the person that you're supporting is using a feeding tube should be enough to automatically be approved for the disability tax credit. Now, the next scenario that I want to share is for somebody who qualifies in multiple different areas of daily living. And so they would be considered to have a severe restriction based on the cumulative, or again, those combined effects of restrictions. So Li Xian lives with Huntington disease, a progressive neurological condition that impacts his activities of daily living, including walking, dressing, feeding, and mental functions. He has constant involuntary movements, as chorea, throughout his body and must take breaks while walking. Even with the use of a walker, it takes him at least twice as long as another person his age without restrictions to walk 100 meters. He often relies on help from his spouse, children, or caregiver when getting dressed or preparing food. He also experiences extreme muscle rigidity and loss of coordination, in addition to his involuntary movements, which makes all movements more difficult and time consuming. When experiencing symptoms, he has difficulty getting out of bed and requires the support of another person to walk. Li Xian's condition causes regular cognitive decline and mood disturbances, which impair his mental functions. For example, he has some or severe limitations in going out into the community, performing basic hygiene or self-care activities, performing necessary everyday tasks, focusing on simple tasks for any length of time, absorbing and retrieving information in the short term, and understanding and responding to verbal and nonverbal information. So we can see here that Li Xin is restricted a little bit less, in all of these areas. But because he has restrictions in multiple categories, the combined effect is enough to show that his disability is severe and he would qualify. So now breaking down a few of those other categories of activities of daily living. So under the walking section, it's going to ask similar questions as we saw under the feeding category. So this will be things like, do you take medication? Do you use any devices? Do you require assistance from others? Do you experience pain, fatigue, impaired balance and coordination, impaired or abnormal gait, limited range of motion, muscle weakness, shortness of breath, and again, looking at how severe are those symptoms and how often do they occur. Really important to make sure that you're putting in the frequency very clearly and how often these are happening. So the mental functions category is actually the biggest section of the DTC application form. There are 3 pages of the 16-page application that ask specifically about mental functions. So currently, this category has 10 different subcategories. So under the mental functions, if somebody has severe restrictions in even one of these 10 subcategories, that's enough to count as having a marked restriction in the mental functions category. But if you have some limitations in a number of these, then you could apply with the cumulative effects of impairment. So the 10 categories that mental functions look at are attention, concentration, memory, judgment, perception of reality, problem solving, goal setting, regulation of behavior and emotions, verbal and nonverbal comprehension, and adaptive functioning. It's also important to note that even if your condition is episodic in nature, so sometimes you're doing better than other times, so it's more of a periodic impairment, that can still qualify depending on how you have to basically live your life around those symptoms. So the mental functions category is also going to ask for specific examples under each of those categories. So for example, under goal setting, it'll look about or ask about how severe or how many restrictions do you have with making and carrying out simple day-to-day plans, as well as self-directing to begin everyday tasks. And with this, the severity kind of scale that they use is a little bit different. Each section is a bit different depending on the nature of that impairment. So when we look at severity, it's going to ask about, under each of those categories and the categories under that, do you have no limitations, some limitations, or very limited capacity? So that language is a bit hard to quantify and understand. What does that actually mean? So basically, we can think of that as if you have no limitations, that means you need no help to do this. You can do it 100% independently and all is well. If you have some limitations, that would be if you still can do that activity, but maybe it takes you 2 times or more longer than someone to do that. Maybe you need some help to do that, or maybe it takes you, like let's say if we would expect somebody to shower every 2 days, maybe you shower every 3 or 4 days. So different things like that. And then if you are saying yes, that you have very limited capacity, that basically means that you either cannot do that activity, you need a significant amount of help to do that activity, or it takes you 3 times longer than someone else your same age without those restrictions to do that activity. As well, this section is going to ask about things like your medication, but in this section, it's also going to ask about how effective that medication is. It's going to look at things like devices, therapies, and aids. So, some examples of what somebody could put as devices that they might use to help with their mental functioning. That could be things like a GPS safety device, memory aids, including alarms, calendars, notes, lists, medication organization pack. This could also be therapies like counseling, cognitive behavioral therapy, maybe support from a social worker or a community-based organization. This form is also going to ask about, does the patient have an impaired capacity to live independently? So when answering this question, it's important to think about, you know, what type of support are you still getting if you are living alone? Because I know for a lot of us, we may not have a caregiver that is living with us. We may be living on our own, but is there support that someone else is offering you? Like, are you getting support from family members or friends? Are you getting daily or some sort of regularity, phone calls or reminders or, help getting you to or from appointments? This is a little bit more of that section where other support from people can really come in and help strengthen your application, as well as the assistance that you may require from others. And so, really looking at all the ways in which people support you. And if you are supporting a child under 18, I know that typically HD doesn't come into effect until somebody is, usually around age 30. But if you know someone who has a child under 18 who maybe has a different condition or does have the juvenile version of HD, then looking at things like, do they need adult supervision at home beyond an age appropriate level? Additional support from educational staff at school. And again, how do they compare to their same aged peers who don't have their restrictions? And lastly, which I think I've said multiple times already, the importance of providing those specific examples. So, in the concentration you might put, has difficulty maintaining focus on a subject for any length of time, is easily distracted, and will leave simple tasks unfinished. Under verbal comprehension, you may have difficulty processing verbal information due to cognitive difficulties. And in memory, you may have takes longer to complete tasks and retrieve information from memory, requires visual and verbal reminders to manage daily schedule. All right. Almost finished with my examples, and then I don't have too much more that I'm going to be talking about before we open it up to our question and answer session. So, the last example I have here is for life sustaining therapy. So, Parveen has been living with HD since 2003. In 2019, Parveen began experiencing severe issues with weight loss, involuntary movements, diminished coordination, and difficulty with walking, talking, eating, and swallowing. Due to ongoing complications with the use of a feeding tube, in 2023, Parveen and their healthcare team decided that they will need to stop the use of a feeding tube and switch Parveen to receiving total parenteral nutrition, or TPN, directly into a central vein 24/7. Since this is a vital treatment that keeps Parveen alive, they qualify for the DTC under the life sustaining therapy category. So, again, use of a feeding tube automatically qualifies you as having a marked restriction under the feeding section. But if, let's say, you are someone who is either yourself or know someone who is receiving TPN and that 24/7 care, then that would qualify more neatly under the life sustaining therapy section. The important thing to know and to kind of keep in mind about, what is the best way of me applying for the DTC is that under the life sustaining therapy section, it can be a little bit more challenging to apply under this section because you have to be able to show that you are in need of life sustaining therapy that supports a vital function at least 2 times a week at an average of 14 hours combined a week. So, for example, this could be insulin therapy for diabetes, kidney dialysis. A note that if you or somebody you know has type 1 diabetes, they automatically qualify for the DTC from 2021 onwards under the life sustaining therapy section. And the challenge here comes in that not all activities related to therapy can be included in the time log. So, if you have questions about this, let me know, but just wanted to give you a bit of an overview on that. So again, this is a little bit less important for you as it would be for your medical professional, but really good to know that when completing the form, it's important to use words like substantially all the time, unable to manage activity, takes 2 or 3 times as long to complete an activity, not expected to reach milestones of same-aged peers, requires assistance, really anything that can very clearly tell the CRA how impacted you are, how frequently you are impaired, and what that looks like in terms of your day-to-day activities. Also very important that the application does not include any information about your ability to work, your ability to housekeep and do chores, your ability to manage a bank account, your ability to drive or do recreational activities. The CRA does not care about any of these. It also doesn't care about whether you can go to school, does not matter to the CRA. If you put that information in the application or your medical professional does, it could confuse the CRA agent who's reviewing the application. And even though they shouldn't, they may latch on to the idea of, oh, well, this person can work a full-time job. They, aren't disabled enough to qualify for this, even though we know that's not true and that people who work full-time jobs can still qualify for the DTC. But best just not to include that information, especially if a lot of the examples focus on those activities, because then you're not providing enough detail with the sections that the CRA actually wants to see. And so that could be a reason to deny you. So again, best to just keep that out as much as possible. Now, as I had mentioned, Plan Institute is one of several organizations that can help with the DTC. So we try to provide as much support as we can with whatever needs that you have. So this includes providing sample applications that would be filled out in a way that your medical practitioner could just sign off on if they agree, supporting with renewing your DTC, because most of the time people are approved for the DTC for anywhere from 3 to 10 years at a time. Rarely do people get approval for all future years, which is what we would call a permanent approval. So we can help you through that process if you have to renew. Also, appealing the decision if you're denied, and support to access the other tax-related benefits that are tied to the DTC. So that helpline phone number that you can reach out to is 1-844-311-7526. You can also send an email to helpline@planinstitute.ca. We have a response time right now of about 4 to 8 business days to get a response back. And we also are excited that we can provide free interpretation support at no cost, including in sign languages like ASL. There is also a fantastic online tool about the disability tax credit that our partner organization, Disability Alliance BC, or DABC for short, they have provided. So this actually includes a checklist of all of those activities of daily living. You can fill it out and put in what your restrictions are, and it'll come out with a PDF that summarizes all of that, and you can take that to your medical practitioner to help with the form. It also includes a kind of an automatically generated or kind of preloaded template letter to your medical professional explaining, what the tool is and why this benefit can be so important. So it can help bridge that gap to any communication issues you might have. All right. Almost finished, and then we'll open it up to the questions. So you can start putting those into the Q&A box anytime. So submitting the application, again, you can mail that form into the nearest tax center. For a lot of folks, especially pretty much everybody on the western side of the province or western side of the country, would send it to the Winnipeg Tax Center. But for others more central east of Canada, then you would be looking at the Sudbury Tax Center in Ontario or the Jean Couillard Tax Center in Quebec. You can submit it online in your CRA account. And again, your medical practitioner may be able to submit directly as long as they have the reference number. So once you have submitted the application, the CRA's goal is to review and make a decision on applications within 8 weeks, so about 2 months. We know that in practice, especially over the last year or two with the development of the Canada Disability Benefit, it's taking closer to 3 to 4 months for the CRA to make a decision and inform the applicant via a letter, which is called the Notice of Determination. Processing times and status of the application can be checked online from your CRA My account. You can also give the CRA a call Highly suggest if you're going to call the CRA, do it as early in the day as possible. The phone lines usually open between 8 and 8:30 a.m. And so best to reach them earlier in that day to try to avoid a very long wait time. And that phone number for the CRA is 1-800-959-8281. And then once you have successfully applied for the DTC, there are three possible outcomes. The first is that the CRA may have additional questions and may send a questionnaire to the medical practitioner. If they send this letter, you will not be notified. This is just sent directly to the medical practitioner. So if it's been, let's say, 3 or 4 months, you've heard nothing back, you could either contact the CRA and ask if they sent a letter, or you can just contact your medical professional and say, hey, did you receive a letter from the CRA? If so, do you need any help? Do you need more information from me? And it's important to know that the CRA isn't necessarily looking for a lot of new information when sending that additional questionnaire. More they're looking for additional detail and clarifications on what has already been submitted. So really important that you and your medical practitioner keep copies of the submitted application so that information can be used to fill out that additional questionnaire without contradicting information that was put in there, as well as it makes it easier to reapply in the future if you know what got you approved in the first time, which is the next possible option. Again, it is very uncommon for people to get approved for the DTC permanently, so for all future years. And part of this is because the CRA has hope that you will improve, that medical care is going to suddenly change your condition. There are ways to request that the CRA give you a permanent approval for the DTC. It just may take a little bit of extra work afterwards. And then an option that can be common and is definitely not the end of the road is if you are denied. This happens sometimes for something very simple like a signature or an initial was missed on the application. It could be that there was some information that was missing in the application, or maybe it wasn't explained in the best way. So, most of the time when somebody's denied, usually like 90% of the time, people can get approved by just adding more information. Also, you can just submit a new application anytime. That can be helpful if it's been, like, let's say a year or more since you were denied, or if you are wanting to work with a different medical professional who maybe understands your situation a bit more and can do a better job. If, let's say, you submitted a perfect application, you have no idea why it was denied, you've worked with an advocate, they've looked at it, they also have no idea, they're like, this should have been approved as it is, then you have 3 months to submit a formal objection. And there are two different levels of sort of that appeal process. So we have the Chief of Appeals and Tax Court. But again, most of the time, just by adding more information, you can change that denial to an approval, and Plan Institute can support you every step of the way with that process. All right, so just going to finish off with some more resources and then we will open it up to our question and answer session. So, Huntington Society of Canada is working with Plan Institute to provide a follow-up webinar on the topic of the Canada Disability Benefit on April 1st. Registration is going to be available in March for that, so stay tuned for more information. As well, if you are wanting more information and resources on other topics that we mentioned, for example, the other tax-related benefits of the DTC, or stuff that, or different items that Quinn had talked about at the very beginning, please let Huntington Society of Canada know. You can comment in the chat what you're looking for, or you can reach out directly to the HSC National Office or to your local resource center director. So I put the website here, huntingtonsociety.ca. You can also call them toll free at 1-800-998-7398. You can also send an email to info@huntingtonsociety.ca. So in summary, the DTC, it can be an incredibly powerful tool to help you or someone you know access tax savings, long-term financial savings options, and ongoing monthly financial support for low to moderate income individuals. You can apply many times throughout your lifetime, and it is almost always worth trying. We're here and happy to help. You will also get a copy of these slides and the information that's included on there with the other links and resources. And of course, if you want to connect with Plan Institute afterwards, we're available on most social media websites with our account just being Plan Institute. We can also be reached at planinstitute.ca. For all things about the DTC and Canada Disability Benefit, we have canadadisabilitybenefit.ca. I know, very long. And then rdsp.com as well if you want to learn more about that. All right. With that, I will stop sharing my screen so that you can see all of us in full, and then we will open it up to our questions.